Coming up on One Detroit, a closer look at concerns in the LGBTQ community about violence and protections under the law here in Michigan. Plus, I catch up with Stephen and Nolan for the latest out of Lansing. I'll also take you to a diverse community meeting in Southwest Detroit. You'll hear what their biggest concerns are and be a part of ending violence this weekend on the city's east side. I'm Christy McDonald. We are in Midtown at Great Lakes Coffee Roasting Company. Join me. One Detroit is coming up.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Support also provided by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first. The Cynthia and Etzel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV. The Detroit Journalism Engagement Fund, and by
Business Leaders for Michigan has 5 priorities to make Michigan a top 10 state. Achieve a balanced budget, cut long-term debt, fix our roads, improve all levels of education, further economic growth, plan for a stronger Michigan. How does diversity bring energy to us all? At DTE Energy, we believe that it's the contributions of all that build great communities. As a company, we grow stronger by welcoming the unique perspectives of everyone. As community members, we support our state's broad culture and heritage. From working closely with women and minority-owned suppliers to embracing our local cultures, DTE Energy is powering diversity. The DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public Television.
For nearly 100 years, Ally has been a part of Detroit, and we give back by volunteering and donating in our community. We have a commitment to diversity and increasing economic mobility in our hometown. At Ally, we're dedicated to doing it right every single day.
And viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi there and welcome to One Detroit from Great Lakes Coffee Roasting Company in Midtown. We are so glad that you're with us this week. We have a lot to talk about. Coming up, we're nearing the end of Pride Month as the push in Lansing intensifies to expand the Elliott Larsen Civil Rights Act here in Michigan to include sexual orientation and gender identity. We'll have a closer look at how advocates say protections would make a difference. Plus, we catch up with Stephen Henderson and Nolan Finley with their take on what's happening in Lansing. Also coming up for you, we head to Detroit's southwest side for a community meeting. It's more of our effort to have real conversations about the issues that matter most to people across the city. And then a march in the works to end violence. But can a march really make a difference? Hear what's happening in Island View and how to be a part of it. That is all coming up for you on the show. But let's start off with our closer look at how people in the LGBTQ community here in Michigan are looking for protection under the Elliott Larsen Civil Rights Act and how concerns about hate crimes and violence are very present.
At any time did you go and file a police report about the threatening neighbor or the incidents that have made you feel targeted or uncomfortable?
Janice Poindexter works for Equality Michigan on Detroit's west side.
It's a cry for help. Some people, we are their last hope. Some people have experienced such harmful situations that they come to us in a sense of desperation to be helped.
Poindexter advocates for transgender clients.
If you could find out the person who is really pushing this petition to get you all evicted, that would be really helpful.
Poindexter has been doing this work for more than 10 years and has been demanding protections from discrimination to LGBTQ persons in the state's Elliott Larsen Civil Rights Act, which covers just about everything except sexual orientation.
These laws and these policies directly affect me because I am a proud trans woman of color.
It's time to get Michigan on the right side of history. In the year 2019, nobody should be fired from their job or evicted from their home based on who they love or how they identify.
This isn't a gay or trans or lesbian or bi issue. That is a human rights issue, and it should be acknowledged as such.
Governor Gretchen Whitmer pledged to expand Elliott Larsen, But it's up to the state legislature to change the law. Nationally, FBI statistics show a slow but steady rise in hate crimes against LGBTQ persons since 2014.
So I don't know who the officer was that informed you that you can't make a harassment report or something like that. You definitely can. The best way for you to go, just so that you are protecting yourself and that this is on file. If there's not a police report or there's not a paper trail, then usually people assume that it hasn't happened. It's a young lady, she's received threats from her neighbors saying that she basically needs to move and take her gayness somewhere else.
Poindexter continues to carry a heavy workload.
Just this year alone, according to my database, since January of 2019 up until now, it's been almost 100 people.
A national study from last year shows homicides of transgender and gender nonconforming people of color on the rise. Killings and attacks around the country and here in Detroit.
There was a trans woman that was shot last year at the gas station on 7 Mile in Greenfield.
The victim was hit in the shoulder but was able to testify in court. According to Poindexter, evidence pointed toward a hate crime against sexual orientation, but the prosecutor did not pursue it because Elliott Larsen doesn't cover it.
That sends a very clear message to society that my life is pretty worthless and that other trans women of color lives are pretty worthless. And even though we have pictures and video footage of the crime and can strongly identify it as a hate crime, because we don't have the protections and the laws to really push to protect us, that we couldn't even prosecute under hate crime charges.
With the acknowledgement of sexual orientation under the law, Poindexter says LGBTQ lives will be improved in other ways, too.
It won't dismantle all of our issues, but it will certainly help to establish a better quality of life for us in the regards of reporting these issues, having them tracked for statistics, because right now, a lot of the numbers and a lot of the statistics are off because our community members don't have faith or hope within the judicial system because we're constantly let down by the people that say they are there to protect and serve us.
All right, let's bring in Stephen Henderson of American Black Journal and Nolan Finley of the Detroit News for a look at what's being discussed in Lansing. It's great to see you guys. Happy summer.
Yeah. Great to see you.
All right, so let's go ahead and give me a sense of where things stand about conversations about expanding Elliott Larsen, Nolan.
Well, I mean, in the legislature, I think, you know, their attitude is we created this law, we passed this law. If the law gets amended, it's going to have to go through us. And I think they're right in that regard. The hang up there is you have a lot of folks worried about what happens to religious freedom, what happens to religious groups, particularly the Catholic Church, and will they be exempted from certain provisions? And until they can come to some sort of agreement on religious freedom, I don't think it's going anywhere.
What do you think, Steve?
So I actually had a conversation with some of the advocates about this, and I think what may be taking shape is kind of a compromise that deals with the different parts of the law. I mean, Elliott Larsen does a lot of different things, and some of them there is no disagreement on. Nobody believes, I don't think, that you ought to be able to discriminate against people in housing. Nobody believes you ought to be fired from your job for these things. The real contention is about public accommodations, right? And the bathroom question that keeps coming up. That's where you get conservative legislators dropping off. And so one way to deal with this might be to deal with housing and deal with employment, because those should be no-brainers, and that gets you a little further down the road. And then perhaps you can talk about how to deal with public accommodation. But Republicans would have to be willing to do that, and advocates would have to be willing to give up the public accommodation thing for now. And
I mean, the advocates have been very reluctant to let any piece go. It's been all or nothing. I mean, they had a deal on gay and lesbian, rights a couple of years ago, and because it didn't include transgendered, the deal blew up.
Well, I think that was
so
actually a
there's
good
not
stand.
much of a mood for piecemeal approaches on this. Get what we can today, get the rest tomorrow. There's not been much of a mood for that.
But at the same time, you're having conversations that are happening around the budget and around Line 5 right now. So it feels like there's a lot of different pieces that are happening. What can you tell us about what's happening with Line 5, Stephen?
You know, I don't know that that's close to resolution either. I mean, you've got the Attorney General
We're rolling towards
who
a
is
deadline.
saying,
though.
look, I'm going to act if you don't, but that doesn't seem to have scared the legislature into doing anything, and so I think we're going to end up with this kind of showdown, which will be a court showdown. I mean, she can't just do it. She'll issue an order to do it, and somebody will try to stop her. Will play out there. But while that happens, I think it actually makes it less likely that we get a legislative deal while that court action takes place.
Well, I'm not sure the deal's in the legislature. The deal's between Enbridge and the governor.
Enbridge and the governor, right.
I think there's some willingness to compromise, or there was on the company's part. They went from a 7 to 10 year timetable to a 5-year timetable. But when Governor Whitmer threw the 2-year timetable out there for shutting it down, I mean, that's just absurd, physically impossible. You got to give them something they can actually work within.
I think it's interesting that Enbridge has kind of taken their argument to the people, and whereas every time you open up a newspaper, whether it's the Free Press or the Detroit News, you see full-page ads from Enbridge explaining this is what we're trying to do. Well, it helps the revenue, paying your salary, but trying to explain to people this is what our plan is, and this is what we intend to do.
And that's good, because there has been misinformation out there. People need to understand what the choices are. This pipeline is not simply an optional thing. It serves a critical role in our energy infrastructure. It delivers a lot of fuel. So if we shut that down, then what?
What?
And I think that question is
legitimate. That is a
very
reasonable question, and figuring that out and how much it'll cost should be part of the equation. It's good to see Enbridge at least indulging that conversation now, because for years what they were saying is, no, we don't want to do it. And it's safe.
And we're fine, and it's safe.
Right. And trust us that it's safe, because we do the inspections and all this sort of stuff. We're in a better space now, at least in the way that we're talking about this.
And the alliances they're forming are kind of interesting. The labor union is putting a lot of pressure on the governor, because that is a huge infrastructure job in a part of the state that doesn't have many infrastructure jobs.
All right, speaking of infrastructure, before we leave kind of what's going on in Lansing, what's the word on roads? What's the word on any kind of deal?
I thought that Democratic proposal, that Democratic from the House Democrats, was fascinating, because it was well short of what Governor Whitmer, their own governor, wanted. It's closer to where the Republicans are in terms of dollar amounts, and it's completely unrealistic in terms of where the money's going to come from. But the fact that they didn't come anywhere near $2.5 billion tells me that target number is dead.
That people don't agree on that's what you need, or just saying we're never going to be able to get there in one
no appetite for it.
So the polls have told us a lot about how people feel about that, and they're not in favor. Now, I happen to think that this is not a popularity contest, that the number is agreed upon by everyone who's looked at this and studied it and said, this is what you need.
Yeah, you may not like it, but that's...
If you don't like it, then continue to bump around on the roads and spend $1,700 a year fixing your car.
But if you're a politician who's got to face the voters in 2020,
how do you do that? Right?
You're looking at those numbers saying 80% against.
Yeah, they're very lopsided, and I have to say that I have not felt like the governor, who put that number out there, has done enough of the retail side of selling it to people. If you were going to come up with a number that big, you needed to have a really concrete strategy about moving public opinion behind it, and she's done the same thing that past governors have done, which is the right thing, and explaining why and what will be done with the money. But she's asking for so much more than anyone else did.
She's dead right on where the money should come from. It should come from users.
Yeah, right.
And that's what her proposal does. But the Democratic caucus in the House put out a proposal that completely diverts from that.
Yeah.
It's not paid for by the users. And so I don't know where you come to agreement. You've got the House Democrats, House Republicans, and the governor all in different places.
spaces. Yeah.
All right, well, 1 minute left. Golf coming to town here this weekend.
here.
Yeah, PJ's here.
I've been doing my radio show from the every morning from the.
That's a tough
the
job,
course.
Nolan. Twist
man.
your arm,
It's
right?
absolutely beautiful out there. They have done a remarkable job both on the course and in the neighborhoods around in terms of mowing, sprucing things up.
Yeah, and it's, to have it here when we used to have the Buick Open, and I used to go to the Buick Open. I worked in Flint, and it was it was a great event. But to have it here,
No, it's a big deal. It's in my neighborhood, so it's a little disruptive, I gotta say. The traffic, and they got all these things blocked off. I'm complaining a little, but it is cool to have something like that in the city. It's an unusual event for Detroit, in the neighborhoods, right? And these are some of the city's sort of premier neighborhoods as well, so we get to show off the big houses in Palmer Woods and that sort of thing, and along the golf course, so it's a win.
All right, well, sounds good. All right, thanks, guys. You know, let's head to a community meeting now that we just had a few days ago as part of our effort here at One Detroit to have real conversations about issues that matter to people across the city. Along with our partners at CDAD, which stands for Community Development Advocates of Detroit, we gathered at the Detroit Hispanic Development Corporation. It was a group of about 20 people talking about feeling like they're a part of the changing city, immigration, pollution, and education.
Wanted to open up the conversation again and see some of the issues and projects or things that you all are dealing with within, the Southwest Detroit context.
Being a lifetime resident of Detroit, my family got to Corktown in the 1890s. And growing up, everything from the Lodge Freeway to River Rouge, from Jefferson to Warren, was Southwest Detroit. Corktown was still Corktown, but this is where all our families came from. This was the original immigrant neighborhood here in Corktown. Over the last 7 years or so, the Hispanic community has completely disappeared from this area. Southwest Detroit grew its own nonprofits, it grew its own business district, it grew everything out of necessity that nobody was coming in to save us. And now that we have built this beautiful community, we're being pushed out by development. This new Detroit isn't for everybody. We created this greatness, and now other people are profiting from it.
I also come from immigrant parents. My dad was Italian and my mother's Mexican, and they came in the early 1900s, landed in Southwest Detroit. And so I know Corktown very well because of my father's heritage, and I know Mexican Town very well because of my mother's heritage. I was born in the 48217 area, lived there for 40 years. I just came off of Rosa Park, and I didn't even know if I was turning right on Trumbull because of all that new development, and I'm here all the time. People don't want to say it's gentrification, but it is gentrification. It's about a culture, not a race right now, because I have my white allies, residents in Corktown that are just as scared. They're losing their piece of the pie too. And so now it's about the green. It really is about classism versus racism. I mean, our neighborhoods are struggling.
There's this thing going on that we need to develop Detroit, and Detroiters have been developing all along. We've upped the game on what is community engagement. And we're going to other meetings, development meetings. We go to a development meeting for something in Corktown, and we're told we got to get this done by such and such because that's this corporation's timeline. What on earth does that have to do with our timeline?
The other concern that hasn't been addressed here is our Latino population that is undocumented, and how many times that's a barrier for even citizens of the United States. Their children that are born in this country have difficulty with making those roots that you were talking about because they're not able to identify. They're not able to root themselves and say, I belong here. They're not, even they've came to the program, but at home they're living a different situation where at any time they're gonna be unrooted for where they're at. They're gonna be sent to their countries, or they're gonna have to stay with uncle and aunt, and their family dynamics is gonna change.
You can hear more from our community conversation at DetroitPBS.org. And finally on the show, we hear a lot about violence, crime, and trying to put an end to it in the city of Detroit. It's not an easy ask, and it takes a specialized approach with a lot of different community groups, churches, the police, schools, neighborhood organizations. We've done a lot of stories in the Island View neighborhood on the city's east side, and for the last 11 years, the Church of the Messiah has led a march to stop the violence each June. Well, this weekend, they're looking for more people to join them. But it's more than just showing up for one weekend. Robert Tompkins blogs about Island View, and he's our community liaison, and you can see his posts on One Detroit. He explains how important this event is to the neighborhood.
On the east side, in the Island View neighborhood, residents and the Church of the Messiah prepare for a march to end gun violence in Detroit called Silence the Violence.
Do marches work?
I think marches do work. They bring a lot of attention to different causes, but I feel like things need more than just a march. If you don't have any intent after the march to keep on planning, keep on organizing, it's gonna all go in vain. So I think there should be stuff that goes on after the march.
I can't help it. Murder is inconvenient.
With this particular march, things are changing a little bit, but take us back to the march being started initially.
Well, we started the march because I got tired of burying children. When I first became a priest, I'm thinking I'm going out to save the world. First thing I started doing was burying children who were killed because of gun violence. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is not right. We have to do something about this. And a lot of times people think marches don't work and don't make a difference. But I always tell people, tell that to the mother whose son was killed in a drive-by. And a lot of times you will find out they want everybody to know that this was a person and that they lived and that they had hopes and dreams. So we stand up for that. That's why we provide opportunities as well as take it to the street to let everybody know they're not statistics.
On the last Saturday in June for the last 11 years, the Church of the Messiah has led the march to shed light on gun violence in urban communities. In its 12th year, the march is still necessary, shown this time with the recent loss of DeMarcus Washington.
One of the first young men I met was DeMarcus Washington, senior at Martin Luther King High School, was scheduled to graduate June 13th. And so he came, started working on a room, met him a couple times. We were having a meeting and he came and introduced himself. And now I believe that was on a Monday. That Friday he was murdered in a drive-by, not the intended target. So when John called to tell me what had happened, I told him, I said, John, reach out to the family. We'll have the funeral at Church of the Messiah. But one of the things that the Lord laid on my heart was because DeMarcus Washington was literally working to redevelop this room so that we could do it for job training for hundreds of Detroiters who would be getting jobs. Instead of naming it Church of the Messiah Empowerment Center, we named it the DeMarcus Washington Empowerment Center.
What does this march mean to you?
The march means a lot to me. Growing up here in Detroit, there has been many situations in gun violence in my life. So specifically, I have two cousins who were killed. One was killed during the planning of last year's march, which is very impactful. Another one was killed years back when I was younger. He was my age now, 24. Throughout life, there's been things where I lived in Detroit, of course, and then we'll hear gunshots a lot of times, have to duck down in the house, be careful where you walk because people are shooting sometimes. So as a person who grew up here, we have to deal with it a lot. But of course, we know that it doesn't stem because people just want to shoot and kill people. It's a lot to do with poverty and people trying to survive here in Detroit. So our goal is to just make sure we're doing things to eradicate poverty, which often leads to gun violence in Black communities. It's kind of different than white communities because you don't have people like just saying they want to go shoot up a school. It's more so I'm doing this because I have to survive, I have to eat, I have to pay bills, and other things that deals with trying to survive.
As a young leader in the city of Detroit, Maya will continue to work for a brighter future.
How do you feel knowing that you are going to be, or essentially are, a future leader because of this march, because of this movement, because of this cause?
I don't know. I want to just take it in, I guess, and just make sure I continue to do the work, make sure I bring people in with me is a big thing, too. Succession planning is one of the big things I like to talk about here in Detroit when it comes to leadership and making sure we pass the torch to other people who are coming up behind us, because we don't want it to be to where we have a great leader here in the city or in the country, and then once that person is gone, we don't know what to do. So a big thing for me would be just to make sure I pass my learnings and teachings along to people who are coming up after me, and then also work with people who came before me as well.
If you'd like to take part in the march, it is Saturday, June 29th. Check out more of our stories from Island View at DetroitPBS.org. And that's going to do it for us this week, but make sure you come find us next Thursday for One Detroit. Thanks so much to Great Lakes Coffee in Midtown for having us. I'm Christy McDonald. We'll see you then.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, Craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Support also provided by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first. The Cynthia and Etzel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV. The Detroit Journalism Engagement Fund, and by
Business Leaders for Michigan has 5 priorities to make Michigan a top 10 state. Achieve a balanced budget, cut long-term debt, fix our roads, improve all levels of education, further economic growth, plan for a stronger Michigan. How does diversity bring energy to us all? At DTE Energy, we believe that it's the contributions of all that build great communities. As a company, we grow stronger by welcoming the unique perspectives of everyone. As community members, we support our state's broad culture and heritage. From working closely with women and minority-owned suppliers to embracing our local cultures, DTE Energy is powering diversity. The DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public Television.
For nearly 100 years, Ally has been a part of Detroit, and we give back by volunteering and donating in our community. We have a commitment to diversity and increasing economic mobility in our hometown. At Ally, we're dedicated to doing it right every single day.
And viewers like you. Thank you.